It all started with a report that no one was supposed to read. Yellowed pages, typed, with notes in the margins, classified, transferred to archive number 7, do not leave copies. They were in a gray envelope sealed with sealing wax, and they smelled of old chemicals. On the first page it said, "The Project, Station 12. Experimental Drilling. Deep Acoustic Observations. 1968 to 1971, below are the names, most of which later disappeared from the lists of the Institute of Geophysics, and some from life itself. More than 40 years have passed since then. But even now, when the archives are partially open, no one can claim to have understood exactly what happened at that station. The official reports are concise and dry: drilling, malfunctions, closure of the facility. Unofficial sources, rumors, fragments of recordings, letters. One of these fragments became the beginning of a new investigation, when a journalist, sorting through old boxes in an abandoned warehouse in the Vologda region, came across a tape with the inscription, 12/G/K5. But it all started long before that, when the world was divided into spheres of influence, when seismic and nuclear tests merged into one map of secret interests. The Soviet government funded a series of ultra-deep wells, each of which was supposed to go deeper into the Earth's crust, measure temperature, rock density, and, most importantly, record acoustic activity. The idea, it would seem, is simple: sound travels differently underground, and its characteristics can predict earthquakes, search for minerals, and perhaps even detect enemy underground nuclear explosions. Station 12 was built as a special class experiment. The object was located in an area where the map showed only taiga and swamps, without names. Old aerial photographs show a narrow road, a radio mast, several trailers, and a hangar. Next is a bottomless pit in the ground, surrounded by metal fences. It was there that the pipes and cables were lowered, layer by layer, moving into the depths. The project was supervised by the Institute of Experimental Geophysics, and the technical part was led by a team led by engineer Sergei Vasilyevich Kornov. Kornov was a meticulous, strict man, one of those who used to believe in exact numbers. He was assigned a team of 28 specialists, drillers, geologists, electromechanics, and 3 sound engineers. The latter arrived a little later than the others, with boxes tightly sealed and equipped with airtight cables. In the reports, they were listed as an acoustic control group. At first, everything went smoothly. The well deepened slowly but steadily, and by the end of the first year had reached a depth of more than 3 kilometers. The first tests showed a stable temperature gradient, no anomalies. Sound recordings, smooth white noise, rock noises, rare microseisms. Sometimes the instruments recorded a distant hum, similar to a low echo, but the engineers attributed this to the vibration of the equipment. No one paid any attention to this. And then, in the winter of 1969, the acoustic group reported strange interference. At a depth of about 8 kilometers, the recorders recorded a continuous low-frequency signal, which, according to the operator, did not behave according to physical laws. It did not weaken during filtering and did not repeat itself as a regular harmonic. On the spectrogram, the sound looked like a pulsating tape, as if someone from deep inside was knocking on the wall. Kornov took it calmly at first. "Column resonance," he said, "pressure or sensor failure." He ordered the microphones to be replaced and the recording to be repeated. But the signal appeared again, on a different day, at a different temperature, on a different equipment. And this time, everyone heard him. According to eyewitnesses, it was not just a rumble. It had a rhythm, a barely discernible beat, 3 short, 1 long, a pause, then again. The sound engineers tried to slow down the recording to highlight the waveform. And then they heard something they couldn't explain. Something resembling speech appeared in the recording. Not words, but something close to them, a hoarse alternation of sounds. As if someone underground was trying to imitate human voices. There were patterns typical of speech ranges in the spectrum, and one of the engineers, Platonov, claimed to have distinguished the phrase, "You hear us." Later, these words will become a legend. At the same time, they were recorded in the report under the heading Unchecked Anomaly. From that moment, the alarm started. The night shifts at the station became heavy, there was a slight hum in the barracks, as if an electric current was coming from the ground. The workers had headaches, and some complained that their ears were ringing like a bell. The electrical equipment began to malfunction, the lamps flashed and burned out for no reason, the motors turned off spontaneously. Kornov wrote in the magazine, "Electrical interference is of a strange nature. Synchronously with the pulsation of the signal. The measurements do not match the behavior of the power supply system. Perhaps the source is from the mine itself." The sound was getting louder every day. It was recorded even on surface microphones, and once every few nights you could hear it without instruments, a barely perceptible hum under your feet. One day, in February, there was a glitch during drilling. Driller Sinitsyn did not get in touch. When the cabin was lifted, it was empty. All that remained on the metal floor was a wet palm and shoe marks leading to the edge of the playground. Then the tracks stopped. Sinitsyn was not found. Officially, it was written off as an accident, falling, freezing, wolves. Unofficially, they stopped talking about him. After that, Kornov ordered the drilling to be stopped and requested an inspection from the main geological directorate. The commission arrived, 3 men in gray coats and an officer in uniform without identification marks. They examined the site, studied the recordings, and took measurements. At parting, one of them told Kornov, "Work on it, but no one has heard about the signals yet. Consider it an experimental error." However, the signals did not stop. On the contrary, it became more and more difficult, as if something alive was happening underground. On the new recordings, it was possible to distinguish the rhythm, intonation, and short passages similar to Russian speech. Platonov, unable to stand it, began analyzing these sounds on a spectrograph and, in his own words, was able to identify the words, "Do not rise, deeper, there is light here, careful." Other recordings contained incoherent phrases, as if different voices were overlapping each other. On one tape, Kornov heard his name. After that, he didn't sleep at night anymore. In the spring of 1970, the equipment began to be changed. New amplifiers, digital, at that time, tape recorders and microphones with a reduced noise level were delivered here. An additional group arrived at the facility, 3 observers from a certain department, which in the documents was called only by the abbreviation SOO. No one specified their functions, but it was after their arrival that another person began to keep the laboratory journal, and the old records were sealed in separate boxes with a security clearance number. Drilling continued. The depth exceeded 10 kilometers. The temperature reached incredible values, but the equipment recorded stability. And yet, with every meter, it felt as if the station was not just in the depths of the earth, but on the border of something else, not physical, but almost meaningful. By May, it became impossible to record the voices, they merged into a single low chorus. Sometimes, in the form of short knocks, sometimes, long cries, similar to the wind. The people at the station began to change, silent, annoyed, as if something was whispering in their ears. 2 of them left, citing illnesses. One of them hanged himself in a barack. Kornov wrote in his diary for the last time, "The station seems to be alive. The hum doesn't stop. He penetrates through walls. We seem to be already inside it." A week later, a military convoy arrived at the facility. The work was stopped. The well was ordered to be mothballed. All records and logs were seized. Employees were given a signed non-disclosure order. A month later, the station disappeared. Only foundations and rusted pipes remained on the site of the former camp. There was nothing else marked on the maps of this area, just a flat patch of forest. But decades later, when almost all the witnesses had died, someone found the tape on which the rumble was heard. In the last seconds of the recording, there is a sound similar to a metal door locking from the inside. And if you listen closely, you can hear someone whispering over the noise, "We're still here." In 1983, when the country was already beginning to crack at the seams, but still held its face, a young sound engineer Leonid Markov, who worked at the Seismoacoustics laboratory near Leningrad, accidentally came across a mention of a certain project with the code 12/G. The document was incomplete, a copy of an internal letter from the main geological directorate. It referred to the results of an in-depth experiment and anomalous acoustic effects that defy interpretation. The letter ended with a dry phrase: "No further observations are carried out by the decision of the department." This was a clue for Markov. At that time, he did not know that with this step he would open a door that they were trying to close forever. He was a rational, skeptical man, raised on engineering logic and the idea that everything can be measured and explained. Working with underground sounds, he was used to oddities, resonances, microseisms, layer noises, all of them had patterns. But that letter was different. It mentioned voices, speech structures, and a certain mirror signal phenomenon. It couldn't be, but the signatures on the document were real. He couldn't get the originals, but a couple of months later, taking advantage of a business trip to Arkhangelsk, Markov met a former drilling technician who worked at the northern stations back in the 60s. The old man, hoarse, with bleary eyes, drank heavily and spoke reluctantly, but the name, Station 12, seemed to shock him. He was silent for a long time, and then he said. There was a noise. So much so that the bones were shaking. We were choking him with alcohol, but he was still under our feet. He didn't explain any more, just asked not to talk to others. A week after their meeting, Markov found out that he had died, his heart. However, the old man managed to hand him a metal box with a faded K5 tag. Inside is a coil of magnetic film, an old reel format, and a piece of paper with the inscription, 8 kilometers, entry number 12. Do not turn on at night. Markov brought the coil home. On an old Jupiter tape recorder, he carefully refilled the film and pressed start. At first there was just noise, dense, muffled, as if the wind was moving somewhere nearby. Then there are low frequencies, rhythmic, like heartbeats. He adjusted the filter, removing the interference, and suddenly something emerged from the depths of the noise. Voice. Barely discernible at first, then distinct. Hoarse, as if from underwater. Don't, get up. Markov recoiled from the tape recorder. The film continued to spin. Seconds turned into minutes. Then there was a series of taps, as if someone was hitting the iron from afar. And again the whisper, faster now, more insistent, as if many voices were speaking at the same time. He stopped recording, but in the silence it still seemed to him that the sounds had not disappeared. He didn't sleep that night. The next day, he tried to analyze the recording. Spectral analysis showed a structure similar to human speech, but with a reverse phase, as if the voices were reflected from themselves. It was like reverberation in an empty tunnel, but the sounds didn't match in time, as if the space they were coming from existed at a different point. Later, he noticed an oddity. If you turn the recording backwards, you can distinguish the phrase, "We hear you." He started looking for other mentions of the station. In the closed funds of the university, he came across old drilling magazines, Station 8, Station 10, Station 12. The latter is marked, frozen. Below are the initials, SVK. He found their decoding, Sergei Vasilyevich Kornov. The name was repeated in other documents. But it became rarer every year until it disappeared altogether. Markov became obsessed. He wrote requests to the archives, traveled to Moscow, and tried to get data through friends. But almost everywhere the answer was the same: the data was lost during the review of the departmental fund. One day, he got a call from an unknown number. A man's voice said calmly, "Don't look anymore. The project was closed for a reason." After that, the line went dead. But Markov did not stop. He restored some of the equipment that was used at the station, old depth microphones, amplifiers, pressure sensors. He installed all this in the cottage, in the basement, where the noise was minimal. The goal is to understand exactly what was recorded on that tape. At night, when he turned on the equipment, the air seemed to shrink. Strange fluctuations appeared on the oscilloscope screen, although the microphones were silent. Sometimes there were echoes on the tape, as if someone was moving around the room. On the third day, he heard his name being softly spoken. After that, he began to be afraid to go down to the basement. In the fall, he met with a woman, a former employee of the Geophysical Institute. Her name was Olga Lachanova, and she participated in an acoustic profiling project in the 1970s. When asked about the station, she was silent for a long time, then said, "We didn't understand what we were doing then. It seemed to us that we were listening to the Earth. But maybe it was the Earth that was listening to us." She said that after the closure of the project, many participants disappeared. Some went to psychiatric clinics, others left without a trace. Officially, everything was explained by stress and fatigue, but inside the institute they said something else. Allegedly, one of the engineers wrote down before his death that the voices knew their names in advance. Markov listened and felt the cold under his skin. A few days after this meeting, he decided to go to the place where Station 12 once stood. It took him a while to find the place. The old reports indicated approximate coordinates, but in the current maps, this place was just a forest area between swamps. The road ended at the old bridge, then there was only clay and moss. He walked for almost 2 hours until he noticed the remains of metal structures sticking out of the ground. Bolts, pieces of pipes, and fragments of iron frames could be seen through the rust and moss. In the middle of the field is a funnel overgrown with grass. The air there was heavy, as if soaked in ash. He turned on a portable tape recorder and placed the microphone at the edge of the pit. Silence for long minutes. Then, a barely discernible response, similar to breathing. "Don't, this way." He wasn't sure if he had heard it. But in the recording I listened to later, the phrase sounded clear. He realized that what was on the old tape wasn't over. Markov returned home. A week later, he began recording strange sounds in his room, as if someone was whispering from under the floor. On the film there is a crackle, a low rumble, then something like a distant thud. He was checking the equipment, but everything was fine. Moreover, the noise coincided with the deep seismic data, which was recorded at the same time in the northern regions. It couldn't be a coincidence. He sent a copy of the recording to the institute, but after a few days the letter was returned without an answer, and soon he was called for a conversation. 2 men were sitting in the office. One introduced himself as Captain Gromov, the other did not give a name. They listened to the recording, then took it away and said, "These materials no longer belong to you." Markov tried to object, but the man looked at him in such a way that he realized it was better to remain silent. After they left, he noticed that the tape recorder turned on itself at night. He turned off the power, removed the wires, but in the morning the device was still on, and new meters of film appeared on the reel. On these recordings, he could hear breathing. Then the sounds of footsteps. Sometimes there are voices pronouncing incomprehensible numbers, dates, and surnames. He recognized one of the surnames, Kornov. His diaries were lost, but in one of the fragments that Markov later retrieved from the archive, it was written, "If anyone hears this again, stop." At that moment, he realized that the project wasn't dead, it just went deeper. A few weeks later, Markov disappeared. Neighbors said he left suddenly, leaving the lights on and the door open. In the basement, they found only a tape recorder that continued to work, and a reel of film that rotated endlessly, although it had no end. When they tried to listen to it, the recording stopped at the phrase, "Now you can hear us." It has been more than 10 years since Leonid Markov disappeared. There is no official information about him, only a note in the Institute's bulletin, dismissed at his own request. His apartment was soon transferred to another employee, and his archival files were destroyed after the expiration of the storage period. But something still survived. In the late 90s, when the digitalization of old media began, one of the technicians discovered an unmarked coil among the boxes. The paper tag barely read, K5/12. That technician, his name was Roman Lazarev, was digitizing sound archives. He was young, ambitious, and loved to dig into strange recordings, from military radio conversations to natural noises. When he turned on this tape, his first reaction was simple: marriage. A dull, viscous sound that knocked the level off balance, as if the microphone had drowned in oil. But there was something about the noise that attracted me. Lazarev started the filter, then another one, cut out the lower frequencies, increased the range of 300 to 500 Hz, and under the layer of hum, something similar to breathing appeared. After a few seconds, to the voices. They sounded as if they were speaking from far away, from the depths of the tunnel, and it seemed that they were speaking in Russian, but the words were shifted, as if they could be heard through the water. He saved the fragment and named the file voices1.wave. Then I made more, voices2.wave, voices3.wave. In the third passage, there was a rhythm, 3 short beats, a pause, then one long one. He did not know that such a signal had once been recorded at Station 12. A week later, Roman showed the recording to his colleague, acoustic Sasha Zerdov. He listened, was silent for a long time, then said, "It's not just noise. There is a structure there. It feels like someone is reproducing speech not from the outside, but from inside the wave itself." Since then, their work has turned into a personal investigation. They started looking for mentions of the Station 12 project, but came across only dry reports, all with the same wording: work stopped, data unavailable. Then Lazarev went the other way, through the internet, which in those years was just beginning to unite those who were looking for something that should not have existed. He posted a short audio excerpt on one of the forums about the mysteries of Soviet projects. The reaction was instant. Someone wrote that it was a montage, others that they heard human screams there, and others that it was the pulse of the planet. But among the responses was one from a user named Sever12, "Don't touch it. It responds." At first Roman thought it was a joke, but a couple of days later he received an email. There was no greeting, just a photo attachment. On it, an abandoned playground, a concrete ring, pipes sticking out of the ground. On the back is an inscription, Station 12. The archive area is closed. Access is denied. At the bottom is the date, 1971. He didn't know where the unknown man got this photo from, but at that moment he felt that he was being drawn into something much more than just a rare recording. He began to look for people who had served in the northern expeditions in those years. One of them, a retired engineer by the name of Savelyev, agreed to meet in Murmansk. The old man was thin, and his eyes were shifty, as if he expected to be watched. When Lazarev mentioned the station, he paled. "You don't understand," he said softly. "It wasn't a well. It was a door. We opened it. And then they closed it, but they didn't have time." He said that by the end of the project, the sound was no longer just noise. He began to repeat their own voices. People heard themselves, phrases that they didn't say, but which they actually uttered later. One of the engineers claimed that he heard someone from below repeating his breathing. Savelyev paused, then added, "There's something alive down there. But not in the way we understand life. It's not a creature. This is the very memory of the stone." After this meeting, Lazarev could not get rid of the feeling that he was being watched. In the evening, someone left an envelope on the landing with the inscription, "Do not open." Inside is just a piece of tape and a short note: "If you start listening, don't turn it off until you hear yourself." He didn't listen to the warning. When he turned on the film, there was a crackling sound at first. Then the same low tones as before. But this time the phrase was clear: "A novel. Don't go deeper." He turned off the recording, but in the silence it seemed to him that the voice was still playing. From that day on, he began to hear noise even without headphones. In the subway, on the street, in the sound of the wind, there was that low humming everywhere, as if someone was moving underground. Zerdov noticed that something was wrong with his friend. He tried to analyze the files on his own, but soon said he wouldn't do it anymore. There are frequencies in the spectrum that shouldn't be there, he said. They are not from this range. It's like there are negative waves. When I listen to them, it seems to me that the sound is moving backwards. A week later, Zerdov was admitted to the hospital with severe migraines. The next morning, he disappeared. Lazarev tried to contact him, but the phone did not answer. He wasn't at home. All that remained was the laptop, turned on and stuck on one phrase in the text editor window: "They're back. Now go upstairs." The police found no signs of forced entry. Soon, strange audio files began to spread online. People claimed that they had found the original recordings of the station. They were called depth cassettes. Some claimed that they heard voices after listening, even when the device was turned off. Instructions appeared on the forums: listen for no longer than 30 seconds, do not turn on at night, do not use at low frequencies. But human curiosity is stronger than fear. The recordings were copied, edited, and uploaded again. Entire communities have emerged studying the phenomenon. Some called it an acoustic virus, others called it an echo of the past. And one of the researchers, a specialist in neuroacoustics, published an article in which he claimed that the recordings contain cross-temporal harmonics, in which information can spread not only in space, but also in time. He was soon accused of mysticism and fired. By the early 2000s, interest in the phenomenon had turned into an underground movement. The so-called Archiving 12 appeared on the dark net, a collection of all known materials, including fragments of diaries, photographs of the station, drawings of the drilling rig and, most importantly, a complete package of sound recordings. On the main page was the text: "We listen to those who listen to us." The site existed for only 3 weeks, then disappeared as if it had never existed. But people who managed to download the material started posting them on other sites. Some claimed that it was fake, others that it was proof of experiments on psychoacoustic control. And then there were reports of strange incidents. People who listened to the recordings complained of headaches, auditory hallucinations, and the feeling that someone was repeating their thoughts. Several people committed suicide. Psychiatrists explained everything by the effect of autosuggestion, but those who worked with sound professionally claimed that the phenomenon was real. In some laboratories, anomalies in the spectrum were recorded even in the absence of a source, as if the signal came from the equipment itself. It was at this time that journalist Arkady Vlasov became interested in the history of the station. He worked for an independent portal specializing in investigations of closed Soviet projects. At first, he was going to write another article about paranormal myths, but the deeper he dug, the more he felt that there was something more to this story. He found Markov's name, then Kornov's. I contacted archivists who had access to declassified documents from the 1970s, and came across a report saying, "The acoustic phenomenon has no physical explanation. Stop working. Conservation is mandatory. Sample storage is a special control." Vlasov wrote in a marginal note, "Storage, where?" He managed to find out that the boxes with films and devices had been taken to a certain N-12 foundation located near Arkhangelsk. The place was listed as a warehouse of the former Defense Institute, but it was also guarded in the 2000s. He decided to go there. The trip took 2 days. The road led nowhere, the asphalt gave way to gravel, then mud. The remains of concrete fences stretched along the path. On the 3rd day, he went out to the old playground. The sign on the gate read, "The facility is closed. Passage is prohibited." Through a gap in the fence, he saw rows of metal containers overgrown with moss. One of them had been opened, and there were reels of film and boxes of instruments inside. He recorded everything on camera. And when I listened, I realized that a faint tremor, similar to breathing, was coming from the ground. When he returned home, he listened to the audio again. Apart from the wind, there was really sound in the recording. A quiet but repetitive rhythm, 3 short ones, 1 long one. He checked with the archive, it coincided with the signal of the station. This marked the beginning of a new round of investigation. Vlasov published an article titled "The Station That Did Not Exist." The publication caused a stir. Some called him a charlatan, others a whistleblower. A week later, the material was removed, at the request of the authorities. But history has already gone hand in hand. One of the readers sent him an audio file signed, Depth 12, Extended Version. There were more than just noises in it. There were voices saying the coordinates. When Vlasov checked them on the map, they pointed to the same place where he was. He realized that it wasn't over. And it was then that for the first time he felt that his apartment was breathing at night. The ventilation was humming differently than before. The sounds in the walls formed a rhythm that he already knew. Sometimes it seemed that somewhere under the floor someone was tapping, responding to his breathing. He recorded everything on a dictaphone. There are quiet, barely audible phrases on the tapes: "We hear you, careful, the door is open." At some point, he realized that there were more voices. They weren't just talking from below. Now it's right next to it. By the early 2010s, the history of Station 12 had finally gone beyond archives and legends. Several universities and private laboratories have included the study of anomalous acoustic phenomena in their programs. The reports did not mention names, dates and coordinates, only hints, deep signals of unknown origin, audio reactions to the absence of a source. Gradually, a narrow circle of specialists formed around the phenomenon, who worked independently, exchanging only measurement results. They were united by the feeling that there was an invisible gaze behind each new experiment. One of these research centers was established on the basis of the old Geophysical Institute in Arkhangelsk. Under the guidance of Professor of Acoustics Gromnitsky, the group launched the Reconstruction 12 project, an attempt to mathematically reconstruct sound waves recorded on preserved tapes. The known fragments were digitized, cleaned of noise, and placed in a digital model that mimics the structure of the Earth's crust. The researchers wanted to determine what was causing the steady low-frequency pulsation. The result turned out to be stranger than any expectations. During modeling, the sound formed a stable three-dimensional field, similar to a complex geometric shape that had no physical counterpart. Changes in temperature and electromagnetic background were observed inside this field. It seemed that the mathematics of sound itself gave birth to matter. The experiment was officially discontinued due to lack of funding, but part of the team continued to work informally. They installed sensors in the northern regions and began monitoring signals similar to those once recorded at the station. After a few months, the sensors began to produce anomalies. Identical frequencies appeared synchronously in areas hundreds of kilometers apart. It couldn't be a coincidence. It seemed as if an invisible network was spreading underground, slowly repeating the rhythm of the old well. The information was leaked to the scientific community, and then to the press. There have been publications about the memory of the lithosphere, that the Earth's crust stores acoustic imprints of events that occurred millions of years ago. But in some notes there were words that caused alarm: vocal structures, temporal symmetry, self-developing signal. Equipment failures were recorded in university laboratories, magnetic recordings were demagnetized, people complained of tinnitus and a feeling as if the walls were pulsating. With the development of artificial intelligence technologies, some of the old recordings have been machine processed. Algorithms trained to recognize speech patterns began to identify repetitive sequences that did not belong to any known language. The programs tried to interpret them and gave the result in the form of signs that resembled drawings or diagrams. Scientists did not understand why mathematical models of sound create images similar to architectural plans. Some of them showed the contours of columns and corridors going down, as if the signal itself described the structure of the underground space. At that time, a short circuit occurred in one of the private laboratories. A huge file with no name was created on the server where the processed audio data was stored. It weighed more than the entire base of raw materials. When trying to open a file, the screen started flickering, and after a few minutes the computer completely froze. When the researchers transferred the data to an independent medium and connected it to an oscilloscope, the device showed pulses in a range that humans are unable to hear. Nevertheless, those present felt a slight pressure on the eardrums and an incomprehensible anxiety. After a few days, all the participants in the experiment had the same symptoms: headache, insomnia, and a feeling that someone was standing and breathing nearby. There was no mention of this in the scientific report. The document ended with the phrase, "The activity of an unknown source has been localized." But localization proved impossible. The wave spread, covering all new regions. Strange vibrations began to be detected in the northern mines and oil wells, which occurred even when the equipment was stopped. Geophysicists have noted that seismographs show weak but regular tremors at the same depth. On the graphs, these signals formed a line extending under the continent, and converged at about one point, at the coordinates of the former station. Then the government again turned to the military structures. A research team was sent to the area where the facility was once located. Officially, it is used to assess the geotechnical condition of soils. In fact, to check the rumors about spontaneous activity. The expedition did not last long. Satellite images showed that a few days after the arrival of the equipment, the area around the site changed its reflectivity, the soil became darker, and the temperature rose by several degrees. Then all the equipment of the expedition stopped communicating. A week later, rescuers arrived at the site and found only destroyed hangars and melted remnants of equipment. The reports indicated possible fire. After that, the place was closed again, but the rumors did not disappear. On satellite maps, the area was displayed as a neutral zone without detailed data. Some independent researchers have claimed that there are distortions over this area at night, as if the air there is shaking. People who were nearby spoke of a heavy sound, like a distant heartbeat. Meanwhile, digital archives with digitized records began to behave strangely. In some of them, additional fragments appeared that did not exist before. Files recorded with private access spontaneously changed size, and voids filled with structureless noise appeared on the timeline. Upon deeper analysis, it turned out that the noise was not accidental. There was a logical sequence in it, as if the data was being rewritten from the outside. Several independent groups stated that they had received acoustic packages sent over the network from an unknown source. They did not contain identifiers, but had the same characteristics as the station's signals. No one has been able to explain how a sound file can propagate itself. The concept of a deep wave appeared on the forums, a digital analog of what once sounded underground. At a certain point, the boundary between physical and virtual space began to blur. The programs that processed the archive recordings went out of order, producing strange patterns on the screen, similar to the reflection of the surface of water. In the laboratories, there were short blackouts, clock synchronization failures, and changes in air temperature. People who worked with the signals complained that they felt a slight tremor of the floor, even if they were on the upper floors of buildings. The researchers, who did not want to stop working, tried to use quantum sensors to capture where the signal was coming from. But the instruments did not show coordinates, but a time shift. It seemed that the wave was not coming from a specific place, but from another moment. On the timeline, she moved towards the observer, as if she herself was striving to be heard. By the middle of the decade, the terms acoustic memory of the environment and self-replication of the signal began to appear in reports. Scientific journals refused to print such materials, but the documents were distributed informally. Some argued that the Earth's crust does not just transmit sound, but stores information that is activated when someone tries to decipher it. It's as if the very attempt to listen provokes a response. The response has been getting stronger every year. The satellites recorded unusual low-frequency fluctuations that coincided with the initial data of the project. They manifested themselves in different parts of the planet, as if the underworld had begun to respond. At international conferences, this phenomenon was called geoacoustic resonance, avoiding any hints of mysticism, but on the sidelines they said something else: something is awakening under the surface. Some scientists left the research, others disappeared without a trace. Archives were edited, documents were rewritten. And yet the sense of presence remained. Those who have worked with original sounds at least once claim that even in complete silence they continue to hear that very pulse, as if it had become part of the perception itself. By the end of the decade, the Reconstruction 12 project officially ceased to exist. But digital traces of his work remained online, fragments of data that do not have an author or a date of creation. They keep appearing, copying, overwriting. No one knows where the new files come from, why the same patterns are repeated in their structure, and why, if played back, the air pressure in the room begins to change. So gradually the history of the station returned to its starting point. The signals, once silenced under kilometers of rock, have penetrated the world again. But now no one was drilling the ground. She spoke up. By the beginning of the new decade, the theme of Station 12 had completely disappeared from the public field. Archive sites with records stopped being updated, many laboratories were closed, and the remaining employees seemed to have disappeared. Those who still remembered refused to speak. Universities stopped mentioning the project itself, and all links related to it disappeared from the scientific indexes of articles. It was as if someone had carefully cleaned out the traces, returning the memory to zero. But silence did not mean oblivion; on the contrary, it became an environment in which something else began to sprout. At first, the changes were subtle. In different regions of the country, from the northern coasts to the steppe regions, a slight tremor of the soil began to be noted. Seismologists recorded tiny deviations, but the data did not match the known types of vibrations. It wasn't an earthquake. The waves did not move horizontally, but seemed to rise from the inside, smoothly lifting the earth, as if breathing was growing under it. In those places where these tremors were felt, people had a strange feeling, as if there was a barely perceptible low sound in the air, so quiet that it could not be heard, but could be felt by the body. Gradually, this background became permanent. He did not interfere, did not disturb, but created a feeling of dense presence. The instruments detected a slight magnetic deviation, which had no explanation. Even during the day, it seemed that the light was getting softer, the air was getting thicker, and the shadows were taking on a direction that did not coincide with the sun. People began to get tired for no reason, their attention wandered, and their memory lost its consistency. There were no official comments. Meteorological stations were silent, military satellites were publishing neutral data. But from time to time, on forums where abnormal signals were once discussed, short messages appeared, almost identical, written by different users from different countries. They all talked about the same thing, the feeling as if someone was moving somewhere under their feet, as if slow life was going on under the surface. Meanwhile, new recordings began to appear in private collections. They had no labels, were not associated with known archives, but had the same acoustic signature as the old station films. Upon analysis, it turned out that these sounds could not be recorded, they did not have a spectrum that could be picked up by a microphone. They existed only in digital form, as if they were calculated, not heard. But the strangest thing was that when decoding the binary data, the audio file contained sequences of numbers that matched the coordinates of real geological structures all over the planet. Some researchers have suggested that the Earth's crust has become a single resonator. Once upon a time, a layer was pierced deep at the level of the well, which separated the ordinary silence from what lies behind it. After the closure of the station, this border did not recover, but began to spread slowly. First, as a vibration, then as a temperature fluctuation, and finally as a structure embedded in matter itself. Those who understood what was happening couldn't change anything. Any attempt to measure the signal, record it, or even just observe it caused a backlash. The sound seemed to return to the source. People lost their bearings, equipment failed, and devices recorded negative time values. It became obvious that the phenomenon had ceased to be physical, it had become part of perception, part of the very act of observation. In the old reports that were still stored on the dusty shelves of some archives, one could find the phrase, with deep measurements, "It is not the sound that is heard, but its expectation." Now this expectation has filled the whole world. It was felt in empty rooms, in the depths of mines, in the depths of the sea, even in the silence between words. Gradually, scientific instruments began to record the disappearance of the background. The vibrations weakened, and the magnetic fields leveled off. Everything seemed to be calming down, but the silence was different. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it carried structure. In this silence, a direction appeared, as if someone from the depths was listening again. And the more attentively a person listened to this immobility, the stronger the feeling that she was looking back became. The geologists, who remained faithful to the idea of understanding the nature of the phenomenon, assembled the last expedition. They decided to descend into the abandoned mines, where the strongest signals were once recorded. There, at a depth of several kilometers, they installed modern sensors, new, generation devices capable of detecting microvibrations with an accuracy of up to 1 billion Hz. Nothing happened for the first day. Then the instruments began to register weak pulsations. With each passing hour, the amplitude grew, and the waveform became more and more orderly. On the third day, a familiar picture appeared on the screen, the repetition of the station's rhythm. The team did not have time to complete the study. A few hours after the last signal, the connection was interrupted. When the rescuers went downstairs, they found the equipment intact, but there were no people. The stairs they went down looked untouched, and the tools were in their places. Only the sensors were turned on in the center of the hall, and the same pulse that had been recorded many years ago was slowly repeating on their displays. After that, officially all underground work in the region was suspended. The place was declared a closed area again. But there were no fences or guards around him anymore. It seemed to have become superfluous. No one else was looking for the entrance anyway. Years have passed. The world gradually forgot about the project. New generations of researchers knew only vague rumors about some kind of Soviet drilling and strange sounds from the depths. Archives have lost their meaning, because everything that could be found has already been heard. All that remained was a legend, blurred in the mind as a story about people who tried to hear the depth and found themselves in it. But on some nights, when the air becomes still and the wind suddenly stops, you can catch a slight, almost imperceptible beating, and then it seems as if the earth is breathing under your feet. It's not a sound, it's a memory of a sound. An echo of what once broke through from the inside. Now no one knows if this discovery was a mistake or an inevitability. Perhaps the sound just found its way out, like water breaking through a stone. Or maybe he's always been here, just waiting for someone to go deep enough to hear him. Station 12 remained only on old maps and in non-existent coordinates. But the very idea of listening to depth lives on. Every time a person listens to silence, he becomes a part of it, connecting with what was once sealed in the rock. And there is more to this connection than fear or knowledge, it is the realization that the boundary between the surface and the depth has long disappeared. Once upon a time, drillers would close a well to stop the sound. Now the world itself has become this well. And if you listen closely, you can understand that what seemed to be voices from the depths has long become our own echo. Some sounds are really better not to hear.